Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Alexander, for representing the Corps of Engineers at this hearing on hurricane preparedness. My community dreads hurricane season, not just because of impending storms, but because year after year, as a result of the risk management that surrounds hurricane preparedness, through the Corps of Engineers, water is discharged out of Lake Okeechobee, hundreds of billions of gallons of water, often laden with microcystin algae, cyanobacteria, blue-green algae. Right now, the water being released from Lake Okeechobee into my community has 15 times greater the level of microcystin algae, which leads to a number of human health hazards, 15 times greater than what any human being should be exposed to. This is all in the aim of risk management for the dike surrounding Lake Okeechobee. So I want to ask you some pointed questions on the risk management of the water levels of Lake Okeechobee, the risk management of the dike, the potentially failing dike around Lake Okeechobee. What is the level of water in inches, feet that Lake Okeechobee should be at going into hurricane season so that there's not a risk of dike failure?
Mr. Mast, thank you for the question. Going into the beginning of the wet season, we strive to maintain a lake level of approximately 12.5 feet.
12.5 feet is the maximum level that you want going into hurricane season?
Yes, sir, and then up to 15.5 feet beginning of the dry season.
And is that for strictly the purpose of risk management, or are you keeping that 12 to 15.5 feet on the lake for other purposes?
That's a combination of trying to meet other purposes and balance the needs associated with environmental, water.
Then you gave me an answer to a question I didn't ask. I asked you, what is the level on the lake for that lake, that dike, to be safe from dike failure? Not for other concerns, not for drinking water, not for agricultural irrigation, not for agreements with the tribes around the lake. What level do you need the lake at so there's no risk of dike failure with the Herbert Hoover Dike?
We go into, as I said, we go into hurricane season attempting to reach a level no less than 12.5 feet.
Now, getting into those other concerns, I know I sent you these questions in advance so that I would have the answers given to me on this. How much water do you keep on the lake for these other concerns that you talked about? How much water in inches or feet is kept on Lake Okeechobee for the purpose of agreements with the tribes?
I'll give you the bottom line up front. Lake Okeechobee is not managed like a core flood control reservoir. The Herbert Hoover Dike, essentially it's a levee system that encompasses and contains a prior free-flowing lake. The specific question on inches of water, it's not applicable in the management of Lake Okeechobee?
Sir, Lake Okeechobee and the Corps of Engineers absolutely keep track of every inch of water that goes on Lake Okeechobee. Earlier in the season, the Caloosahatchee municipalities were requesting 1,000 cubic feet per second for several months, hoping to get about an inch of water off Lake Okeechobee because they needed that for the ecology of their waterway. They were denied. The Corps of Engineers has a call every single week where they pay attention to exactly the amount of inches or quarter inches of level of change on Lake Okeechobee. So absolutely, Lake Okeechobee is managed and regulated in that way. So let me ask you a different one. How much water is kept on Lake Okeechobee in the form of what's requested by consumptive use permits for agriculture? How many inches, how many feet of water are kept on Lake Okeechobee for that purpose?
Well, I would like to state that the Corps of Engineers does keep track of probably every inch of water in that reservoir. That being said, though, we don't have specific allocations for those specific purposes and those consumptive use agreements. Again, it's a balance between this 12.5 and 15.5 feet. And it's managed as a system along with some other, laws that exist down there with respect to the consumptive use, the Lake Okeechobee surface area water input rules. So we have to balance the multiple purposes and potential uses.
So in balancing those purposes, sir, I had a conversation just a couple weeks back with the South Florida Water Management District. I asked them about the ecology of the lake. They said the optimum level of the lake for its ecology is at minimum 11 feet. And I asked them, okay, if the water level on the lake should not be below 11 feet, If irrigation, or those that need water, agricultural irrigation, or those that need drinking water, or somebody else needed water for those concerns, if the lake was at 11 feet, would you still send the water to the irrigation canals for agriculture? The answer was yes. If it was at 10 feet, would you still send the water to the canals for agricultural irrigation? The answer was yes. If it was at 9 feet, the answer was yes. If the lake was at 8 feet, a dangerously low level, the answer was yes, they would still get their water for those purposes. So is it right that you keep the water at this higher level when my community is destroyed because this water is at that higher level, when you're still going to send the water to these other areas for their purposes, even if the water is down as low as 8 feet on Lake Okeechobee?
Sir, I've not been privy to any of those conversations that you have had. What I will say is that I know that our Jacksonville district is engaged with the community, is very engaged with you. I'm not an expert on Lake Okeechobee and the releases, but what I will offer is an engagement with you, Colonel Jason Kirk, the district commander, and anybody from his staff or here at headquarters who could walk you through in detail how we manage Lake and then what the risks are at the various levels.
Thank you for the answers to your question, Mr. Chairman. I yield back, and I do request a second round of
minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Alexander, let's get back to risk management of Lake Okeechobee during hurricane season. The Corps of Engineers recently said when they were announcing their releases of water to the Treasure Coast of Florida from Lake Okeechobee that in their risk calculation was the threat of life to 36,000 people south of Lake Okeechobee. That's something that goes into that risk assessment matrix. Knowing the situation there, 1 inch of water, 6 inches of water, 1 foot of water, that can be the difference of failure or not failure on that 730-mile square lake of Lake Okeechobee during a storm. So again, I point out the Corps of Engineers absolutely manages and pays attention to every inch of water that flows into Lake Okeechobee, sits on Lake Okeechobee, evaporates off of Lake Okeechobee, or is discharged out of Lake Okeechobee into some other body of water that it probably has no business being in. The Corps of Engineers pays attention to it. Now, I want to ask again, you do not have the numbers for how much water is maintained on Lake Okeechobee for the purpose of drinking water.
Sir, I do not believe I ever said that the Corps doesn't manage and knows exactly how much water is in the lake itself. That being said, again, Lake Okeechobee is not managed like our flood control multi-purpose reservoir. We work on a balance, again, between 12.5 and 15.5 feet, and that balance is to meet multiple purposes: environmental, water supply, water control, flood navigation. But at the end of the day, you know, we have to place a premium on risk.
At the end of the day, it's risk. And if you're keeping more water on the lake than what should be on there, then that puts at risk, according to the Corps of Engineers, 36,000 people south of Lake Okeechobee. So I'm formally requesting from the Corps of Engineers that you do tell me exactly how much water you keep in terms of inches or feet on Lake Okeechobee, or in terms of gallons, for the purpose of agriculture irrigation, for the purpose of drinking water in the communities, for the purpose of the agreements with the tribes. What are the amounts through those consumptive use permits that is kept on the lake, because the Corps of Engineers needs to manage how much water is on the lake through your own admittance for all of those purposes, in addition to risk management, in addition to a number of other things. How much water for each of those? I'm making a formal request to the Corps of Engineers to get those answers to me. I want to move to one other question here before my time has expired. I recently sent a letter to the Corps of Engineers asking, in the name of hurricane preparation and risk management, this water that's being released into my community out of Lake Okeechobee, the Corps does have discretion based upon pollution concerns that could be in the water. And I asked a specific question. What level of pollution or toxins of water in Lake Okeechobee would be considered too great of a level where the Corps of Engineers would say we cannot discharge water to these epicenters of human population, the Treasure Coast of Florida or the West Coast of Florida? What level of toxin in the water would be considered too great? And the answer was entirely avoided. So I want to ask you, if there was cyanide in the water, would the Corps of Engineers cease discharging water to these epicenters of human population?
You know, sir, I'm not avoiding your question. I don't have the answer. You know, I am offering an engagement, whether it's here in D.C. or down in your district, with the district leadership, with experts here at headquarters, Army Corps, and to discuss these matters. I'm not an expert in Lake Okeechobee. I did receive your questions in advance, and if I had specifics as to how many inches for this or that, I would have provided it today.
If there were lead in the water, would the Corps of Engineers cease discharging water to these epicenters of human population?
Sir, I cannot answer that. I don't know what the tolerable levels are.
If there were arsenic in the water, would the Corps of Engineers cease discharging water to my community, an epicenter of human population that is not naturally connected to Lake Okeechobee? The Corps of Engineers is discharging the water as a result of risk management, hurricane preparedness, that if they're discharging water right now, clearly enough water was not discharged earlier in the season.
Again, sir, I don't have the specific answers. I have to believe, though, that you know, there are other regulating agencies who do pay attention to what those toxic levels are, and I am confident that they work hand in hand with the Corps as we look at those releases. But again, I would offer a detailed laydown with you to discuss these matters, and it probably needs to involve officials beyond the Corps itself.
Thank you for the second round of questioning, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.